Hi, good evening. My name's Nick Brodin. I work for the Berkshire Northumberland Marine Nature Partnership, but I'm also a part-time PhD student at Newcastle University, studying Little Terns under the supervision of Professor Mark Whittingham and Dr. Richard Frankson. And I want to talk to you tonight about some work I've been doing in the last couple of years looking at food provisioning and diet in little tern chicks. And this is work that's been supported by and made use of data from the EU Life-funded Little Tern Recovery Project, which was established for a 5-year period in 2014. Just wanted to start by giving a bit of background to the little tern and say a bit by why it's of conservation importance. Little tern is the smallest of the 5 breeding species of tern we get in the UK. It weighs about 50 grams, about the same weight as a tennis ball, and the adults average about 24 centimetres in length. Little terns found across Europe and Asia, and actually down into Australia as well. But the birds we have in the UK are all summer migrants from West Africa who sort of arrive here during the summer months to sort of breed and raise their chicks. Within the UK, little tern is an exclusively coastal species, and it lays its eggs in scrapes made in sand or shingle on beaches or spits or similar. It normally takes about 21 days from egg lay to chick hatching, and then the chicks take about 20 days to fledge from then. In the period before they fledge, they're entirely reliant on their parents for their food being brought to them. Adults tend to forage very close to the breeding colonies. Typically no more than about 4 kilometres is the figure normally given. And they feed in sort of shallow waters close to the coast, and they feed by plunge diving, so they'll hover a couple of metres above the water and then sort of dive in when they need to capture a food item. There are less than 2,000 breeding pairs of little tern in Britain, and it's a species that's been in decline for some decades now. So the graph I provided there has been taken from the JNCC website, and you can see it presents the index of abundance of little terns and how that's declined since the mid-80s. So if you follow the solid red line in the middle of the graph there, you can see that clear downward trend. As a result of these declines, the species is considered to be of amber conservation status in the UK. And little tern is also given strong legal protection, both under sort of UK legislation, but also under European legislation as well. So it's a Schedule 1 breeding bird under the Wildlife and Countryside Act to protect it from reckless or deliberate disturbance. And it's an Annex 1 species under the EU Birds Directive, so it's a species for which member states can designate special protection areas, or SPAs in order, to protect the birds there. So there are a number of little tern SPAs across Europe and within Britain, and we have 4 of them actually within the North East region. So within the North East, we have the Lindisfarne SPA, the Northumbria Coast SPA, the Teesmouth and Cleveland Coast SPA, and the Northumberland Marine SPA, all of which have little terns as one of their interest features in among several other bird interests. So there are a number of threats to little terns that can cause chick mortality and sort of affect productivity in any one year. Disturbance is known to be an important factor influencing productivity of little terns, and in extreme circumstances may also lead to sort of nest abandonment in any year. Again, this is unfortunate because of where little tern tends to nest in the UK, which is on mainland beaches, automatically that sort of puts them in conflict with other users, particularly human users of those beaches as well, which results in a lot of the existing colonies actually having to be sort of heavily wardened during the breeding season to protect them. Predation can also be a major cause of chick mortality and egg loss throughout the breeding season. A wide variety of both avian and mammalian predators will take chicks or eggs. And then finally, little terns don't do themselves any favour, and actually where they tend to mate their scrapes. They tend to mate them very low down beaches, close to high tide marks. And as a result, they're very prone to losing chicks and eggs to high spring tides and to sort of tidal surges as well. Later on in the presentation, I'll be showing you some video clips taken at Long Nanny, and also actually you can see a picture from the Long Nanny colony in the bottom left-hand corner. Those of you who visited that site will have been made aware that actually as part of the management there, where they nest on a sand spit that's particularly prone to overtopping by the tide, particularly early in the season, they move the eggs and the scrapes actually onto fishing crates filled with sand there as a management measure to give them a bit of extra height sort of early in the sort of brooding and raising season, and to give them a couple of extra feet to protect them from any high tides that occur. So because of the concerns about declines in little terns because of the threats to them, in 2014 the Little Tern Recovery Project was established with funding from EU Life. The project was led on by the RSPB and included a number of partners. The logos are provided below there, and the project aimed to provide a strategic and coordinated approach to little tern conservation in the UK. So, for example, one of the final outputs of the project towards its end was to produce a little tern recovery plan to steer the work of all the various partners in future. The project was active on 29 breeding sites within England and Wales, and carried out and a wide variety of different types of work were carried out at those sites within that. So there was site protection work, so practical habitat management work, things like fencing and improved sort of predator defences, etc. There was a big strand of education and communication. And also a lot of time spent on research and monitoring. So research included research into sort of fundamental issues about sort of little tern ecology or little tern colony management. And those of you who subscribe to the journal British Birds will have seen in their February edition, for example, a very interesting paper that was produced looking at the colour ring scheme that was put in place as a result of the LIFE project. But also monitoring work took place at all the colonies and looked at things like chick productivity, chick numbers. But among that monitoring at a number of the sites was also work to actually do feeding surveys, series of chick provisioning as well. And again, I'll come to details of that slightly later on. So the focus of the research I've been doing the last couple of years as part of my studies has been on little tern diet, and I thought it would just be useful just to pause a moment and actually address the question of why study little tern diet, or indeed diet of seabirds generally. At the most general level, seabirds sit at the top of the marine food chain, so actually they're excellent indicators of the health of the wider marine environment. And gathering data about what they're eating and any changes in what they're eating can be a good sort of early warning sign of changes that are taking place there, and especially changes in the abundance of prey items that they may be relying on. And we know from a large number of different types of seabird that actually food supply can be a factor which has a big influence on their eventual breeding success in any one year. This is particularly an issue with terns and little terns, as they've been assessed even among seabirds as being especially vulnerable to reductions in food availability. For little terns, this partly results from their sort of short foraging ranges that I mentioned earlier. So as a species that doesn't have much flexibility in travelling far from its breeding colonies during the chick raising season, actually shortages of food locally can have a big impact on their own ability to feed as adults, but also on their ability to feed and raise chicks as well. And it is in fact thought that local food availability is one of the factors that plays a role in how little terns decide where it is they're actually going to nest and where they're going to start breeding colonies. I thought it would also be useful just to say a bit about the focus of the research, just so you've got an idea of sort of why I'm doing all of this and the types of questions that I'm trying to answer through the research. So the research to date has been focused on three main areas, which I'll describe briefly. So first area I'm interested in is chick provisioning rate. So by chick provisioning rate, I mean things like the number of feeds per hour that a chick might get. And I'm particularly interested in looking at what variation exists in these rates and how it changes both between colonies or between years, but also within colonies over time. And one of the reasons for doing this is actually to try and look at what might be the factors influencing and driving changes in provisioning rate as well among chicks. Provisioning rates are also of interest again to look at the potential interplay that the amounts of chick feeding that goes on may have with other measures of colony success. Chick diet is another area where I'm looking at. In terms of those of you who are familiar with the College of Little Terns and their behaviour, will be aware that actually I think it's fairly well established or regarded that chick diet tends to be dominated, tern diet tends to be dominated by small fish, particularly sand eels and what are called clupeids, which is a sort of umbrella term for herring and sprat. So what I'm particularly interested in this research area is actually looking at the composition of the chick diet, so what various species are prey actually going to make up the whole diversity of what a chick might get throughout the season. So particularly interested in actually looking at how this composition might vary, again, both within colonies over time, but also between colonies and between years. And again, similarly as with provisioning rates, I'm particularly interested in sort of trying to look at and investigate what might be the factors that influence the composition of chick diet and any variation we see in that. And then finally, another strand of research I've had has been looking at the sort of some of the methodological issues around data collection. So a lot of this has been focused in the last few years about the use of camera traps and looking at their usefulness for collecting chick provisioning data and dietary data as well, and comparing that and the results of that to more established techniques such as timed feeding observations. And again, the LIFE project were good enough to actually fund and provide me with some camera traps that I've been using for the last few years at the Long Nanny colony in Northumberland. So that was just a very quick overview of the sort of the questions I'm interested in terms of chick provisioning, chick diet. Just want to say a bit about the data collection to provide the information I can use in that analysis. So there are two main sources I'm using of data. The first of them is actually data from the LIFE project itself. So timed feeding observations were carried out by staff and wardens. Staff and volunteers, sorry, at 12 colonies in England and Wales across the life of the LIFE project. And again, the project has been good enough to actually share that information with me so I can collate it and analyse it as well. This is a map I produced actually showing the locations of the colonies which are submitted records for that. Not every colony submitted observations in every year for various reasons, but again it was 12 overall from the life of the project. So you can see from this map what a sort of good spread of colonies they had without that in terms of geography. And overall, it's an impressive data set. So there's almost 600 hours of observations in there and over 2,000 feeding records. And the work is important because it's the only example I know, and certainly the only example I can think of in the UK, where there's been a deliberate attempt to try and collect chick provisioning information from a number of geographically widely dispersed colonies over the same time frame and all using the same methodology. I see that the methodology used here has been timed observations. So what that involves is, as the description might explain, you actually watch a chick or a brood of chicks for a fixed period of time, normally an hour. And during that period of time, you just record every time the chick is fed. You try and record what prey type it was fed, and you also make an estimate of the prey size as well. The normal way of doing this for Little Terns is to express prey size as a proportion of adult bill length. So you might get a prey item that you describe as being equivalent of half a bill length of an adult, or 1.25 bill length, so any other variation on that. And actually the size estimate is very useful because it can act as a way of estimating the likely calorific content of the food items being brought to chicks as well. So again, the data set there is sort of excellent in terms of being able to have a lot of information to dig down and examine that issue about how things vary between colonies, both in terms of diet composition, but in provisioning rate as well. In addition to the timed feeding observations, the LIFE project also had access to and was able to give me access to some camera trap information from Langston Harbour that was collected in 2015 and 2016, which again was a source of over additional sort of 400 plus records. So that's the sort of first sort of data source I'm using in terms of answering research questions. But as well as using or having access to the LIFE project data, I've also been doing my own data collection in sites in Northumberland, again with support from the LIFE project in terms of helping to cover the fieldwork costs of that. So my main study site has been Long Nanny on Beadnell Bay, but I have also done observation work on the Lindisfarne NNR shorebird site as well. So again, that information uses the same timed observation methodology that the LIFE project used. And I'm using it to collect additional information to help answer those questions about chick provisioning rates as well. And also answer questions about some of the methodological questions as well, and to use it to compare effectiveness, for example, between timed observations and use of camera traps. So from that information, I have over 200 hours of feeding observations now made at those colonies, and over 1,300 feeding records. And in addition to that, I have feeding records from the camera trap information from Long Nanny as well. Talking of which, as I have camera trap information, it seemed like a good idea to actually give you some sort of direct experience of what Little Tern feeding looks like, and give you a sort of an experience of what it's like to be on a Little Tern colony. I should say, I mentioned at the start of the presentation that Little Terns are a Schedule 1 breeding birds. So all of the video footage presented here and the photographs as well have all been collected under license from Natural England with all of the necessary permissions in place. So the next two clips just really demonstrate two contrasting experiences of actually watching chick feeding in the field. So the first clip here is of a pair of chicks that are just a couple of days old, so still very young. Say they're still on top of their fishing crate, where again, being Long Nanny, the eggs were moved to protect them from high tides. But as show you here, this is a young chick being fed and actually struggling slightly with being fed a sand eel. Okay. In contrast, the next clip I'm going to show you is actually an older chick, so it's closer to fledgling age. So by that time, it's the older chicks. By that time, they're off the crates at Long Nanny, and they're roaming around sort of at will on the sand spit. So you can see this on the next clip. And that's the feed. So you see a big difference there in how quickly the feed occurred, and you can appreciate if you're doing this for real in the field and you're sat, some distance away outside of the colony looking in using a scope. Sometimes with those older chicks where feeds can happen quite quickly, it can actually be quite challenging to do that estimation of prey size and to identify or attempt to identify the prey type as well. So the research on chick feeding, chick diet is still ongoing, but I just thought it would be useful just quickly towards the end here, just to share some of the initial findings from the analysis I've been doing of the LIFE project data. So I say LIFE project, we have from that, there's over 2,000 feeding records to look at. From that analysis and looking at that, the main prey items within that data set are sand eels and clupeids, so again, herring and sprats, which again is probably not a result that surprises anyone who's looked at feeding in other tern species as well. However, clupeids and sand eel aren't the whole picture in terms of chick diet and what the data set tells us about this. A number of other species are present in that data set as well, although in much smaller numbers. Probably the most commonly seen one of those other fish species was goby. Again, within the observational data or the timed observations, very small numbers. However, just by contrast, and just to show how much variation there can be between individual colonies in diet composition, at Langston Harbour, from the camera trap information, actually goby were the main prey item seen or captured on camera trap, and made up over 30% of the records, and were more common than both sand eels and clupeids combined. Another prey item that was that was regularly occurred in the data set for the Life Project were invertebrates, most of which were described as crustacea as well. But again, these were only present in small numbers. That was interesting itself because some previous research, including one study from the 80s in the UK, has suggested that in some colonies and some years, crustacea can form a very important part of little tern chick diet. But again, that wasn't reflected in the information that's come in through the Life Project data set. I should just say that picture at the bottom there is of a prawn, and it should be credited to Catherine Dunsford, but unfortunately my photo credit seems to have gone AWOL there. But anyway, it is just to credit it to the right person. That photograph is from Catherine Dunsford, and again, thank you to Catherine for providing that. Okay, so the sort of headline picture from the Life Project data set was that chick diet is dominated by clupeids and sand eels, but this is a breakdown by colony of that data. And how sort of from all the data collected over the time, the study, and you can see that at a colony level there is quite a significant variation in the relative abundance of clupeids and sand eels at the sites observed. So for example, clupeids are shown in green there, and you can see for a number of sites they're the main chick prey item that was identified, but sand eels in some of those a very small proportion of actually diet. And the reverse is true for sand eels, where for some colonies they seem to be the main dietary item, but actually clupeids in comparison, not very many of them turning up on the records. So this next slide just digs into that a bit more. And contrast three colonies, so Long Nanny and Lindisfarne and Northumberland and Scolthead in Norfolk, and actually just breaks down the relative proportions of sand eels and clupeids and chick diet by year. So you can see in Long Nanny that sand eels dominate in every year, and even in 2016, where there's a spike in clupeids, actually sand eels still dominate. In contrast with Lindisfarne and Scolthead, a lot more year-to-year variation in the proportion of clupeids to sand eels as well. And if I had to summarise the Life Project data, I'd say it certainly supports the view that's been put forward as Little Terns as being opportunistic feeders whose diet composition is very much influenced by the abundance of prey items in the local area that they're foraging in, and you know, whose diet composition may well change from year to year to reflect those changes in abundance of prey. So that was a very quick overview of some of the interim results I'm finding about chick diet. The Life Project has now ended, but my work is going on for another couple of years yet, and I thought it'd just be useful to say quick bit about where I'm going next on that. So one thing I'm hoping to do this year is start looking at adult foraging behaviour on the coast, to sort of answer the question of where are the main areas around the Northumberland colonies that adult little terns are using to forage, and investigating whether that changes across the breeding season at all. I'll also be doing some desk-based work, actually looking at habitat suitability index models and seeing if they're a potentially useful tool that colony managers can make when they're making decisions about habitat management, and potentially about management to create new areas of breeding habitat for little terns. And around all of that as well, there will still be ongoing work around chick provisioning, and especially about the methodological investigations as well. So thank you all for your time. Thank you to the Natural History Society for inviting me along to speak tonight. Thank you to my supervisors, Mark Whittingham and Richard Frankson. A special thanks to RSPB and the Little Tern project, both for the funding support for the field work and the access to the live project data as well, but also for the help and advice. So particular thanks to Sue Rendell-Reid and to Chantal McLeod-Nolan. And again, thank you to all of the staff and volunteers who actually were involved in the initial data collection throughout the project as well, that I've been able to access. And last but not least, thank you to the staff past and present at the Little Tern colonies in Northumberland, where I've been doing field work. So especially the National Trust staff at Long Nanny and the staff at the Lindisfarne NNR as well. So thank you for your attention. If you've got any questions about anything I've said tonight, or would like to know more details about the research, then please feel free to contact me at the email address given. And if you would like any more details about the Little Tern Life project, you can find that at the project website of the address given there. So thank you and good night.